If you can talk with crowds and keep your virtue, or walk with kings nor lose the common touch, if neither foes nor loving friends can hurt you, if all men count with you but not too much, if you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run, yours is the earth and everything that's in it, and, which is more, you'll be a man, my son. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this wonderful opportunity to listen to a man that Kipling writes about, a man who can keep his head when everyone around is losing theirs, a man who can talk with crowds and kings, a man who can be an ideal for academicians, politicians, and world leaders alike. On behalf of St. Xavier's College, Ahmedabad, I, DeSouza, welcome you to the Herbert DeSouza Memorial Lecture on The Idea of a University by the renowned, enthralling, and simply brilliant Dr. Shashi Tharoor. Thank you, sir. Before we go any further, may I request the esteemed audience present here to turn off their mobile phones or switch them to silent mode. Photographers and videographers are requested not to disturb the audience or disrupt the proceedings while recording. And so, may I request the august audience to rise for the college anthem.
कदम से कदम मिलाएंगे हम, एक नई दुनिया बसाएंगे हम, नई सोच नई उमंग लहराएंगे, आशा की किरण जगाएंगे हम। Xavier's कॉलेज हमारा है, Xavier's कॉलेज हमारा है, Xavier's कॉलेज हमारा है, Xavier's कॉलेज हमारा है। सबसे प्यारा सबसे न्यारा यहाँ का हर एक सितारा, रोशन करेगा जग सारा, रोशन करेगा जग सारा। भरेंगे रंगों से सपने हम, सच की राहें खोजेंगे हम, नहीं कोई भेदभाव यहाँ, नहीं कोई हार जीत, सफलता का हर एक द्वार, आओ मिलके ये खोलेंगे हम। Xavier's कॉलेज हमारा है, Xavier's कॉलेज हमारा है, Xavier's कॉलेज हमारा है, Xavier's कॉलेज हमारा है। प्रेम
Thank you. I would now request the dignitaries to please come to the dais and the rest of the audience to please take your seats. Principal Father Dr. Vinayak Jadhav, please could you escort our honored and honorable speaker, Dr. Shashi Tharoor, as well as the Provincial of Gujarat Jesuit Province, Father Durai Fernand, and the Rector, Father Anthony Pichai, to the stage. Have you seen the universe lit up with stars on a dark night? Or how the waves sparkle when the sunlight falls upon them? Today, this gathering too glistens and shines with the presence of many dignitaries. To match the sparkling audience, we need a sparkling welcome. So I invite another great orator, literator, and leader to radiate his glow on this august gathering, our principal, Father Dr. Vinayak Jadhav, to deliver the welcome address.
I normally do not read, I speak, but not in the presence of Dr. Tharoor today. Honorable Member of the Parliament and Chairman of the Parliamentary Standing Committee for External Affairs, Dr. Shashi Tharoor, Reverend Provincial Father Fernand Durai, Rector of St. Xavier's College, Father Anthony Pichai, Honorable Vice Principals, respected Vice Chancellors, distinguished guests, respected professors, and my dear admirers of both Father Herbert and Dr. Tharoor. A very warm welcome to this memorial lecture in honor of Reverend Father Herbert DeSouza, SJ, and Michhami Dukadam on the occasion of Mahaviri Jayanti today. Dr. Tharoor, we are deeply honored, humbled, and immensely delighted to have your esteemed presence among us today. I must say that even amidst threats of terrorism, we could not resist the temptation to invite you to deliver this memorial lecture, and it was for no ordinary reason. Father Herbert himself was an orator par excellence, a scholar of impeccable English with British accent, having every skill of diplomacy that mesmerized from the Jesuit headquarters of Rome to the Hollywood of Beverly Hills. Who better than you, Dr. Tharoor, would match this legendary personality? Those of us who know Father Herbert can imagine Father Herbert and Dr. Tharoor having a debate today on the idea of a university right here on this stage. No thesauruses of this world would be able to contain the two, I bet. St. Xavier's College is also toying with an idea of becoming a university, but not blindly. Universities are mushrooming like a rat race or a blind chase. Someone quipped that if we did not seriously introspect, we would have Pan universities in every corner of the city offering courses on Chuna and Katha and Kalkatti Pan and Banarasi Pan. Jokes apart, all of us need to gain further clarity on the wisdom of university education, from Takshashila to Harvard and beyond, much along the lines of the book of John Henry Newman, The Idea of a University. To lead us into that introspection, we are privileged to have today the inimitable one and only Dr. Shashi Tharoor. No words are enough to thank you, Dr. Tharoor, for making your presence available for us today. I take the opportunity to thank our friend Father Felix Raj, the Vice Chancellor of St. Xavier's University, Kolkata, whom Dr. Tharoor could not just resist obliging. I thank Father Provincial too for gracing the occasion with his special presence today. Finally, sincere thank you to all of you who have packed this hall and even another one in the campus, the Zika Hall. A warm welcome to dear each one of you. May you have an enlightening and inspiring evening with Dr. Tharoor. Jai Xavier's, Jai Bharat.
Thank you, Father. Thank you. I'm now going to introduce Father Herbert DeSouza and the lecture series. Somehow, the 14th of August was destined to be significant for all of us, even before 1947. On the 14th of August 1918, Herbert DeSouza was born in Karachi in British India. After being educated in India, Spain, and the USA, Herbert, now a Jesuit, was assigned the task of establishing a college. He was only 38 years old at the time. From 1956 to 1970, he worked tirelessly to establish St. Xavier's College, Ahmedabad. Soon, thanks to Father DeSouza, St. Xavier's emerged as the best college not only in the city but in all of Gujarat. It would be apt to say that the credit for the glory of St. Xavier's College today, an A-grade college, accredited and flourishing, ranked among the top colleges in the country in the sciences and the humanities, holding top positions in sports and arts competitions, included nationally as a college with the potential for excellence. All the credit goes to Father Herbert DeSouza and his colleagues who laid such a strong foundation for it. In 1976, Father Herbert felt the need to branch out in a different direction. Even at the ripe age of 58, he decided that he could be a student again. And he studied adult education and communications at Loyola Marymount University, USA, following which he took up a facultyship at the same university. Father DeSouza was a superb orator. He was a much sought-after speaker in lecture circuits across America. His range of knowledge of classical and modern literature, his mastery of the English language, and his outstanding wit kept his audiences enthralled. The Father Herbert DeSouza Memorial Lecture series is one way to commemorate this great personality, his unmatched expression, his oratory, his language, his literature. The college celebrates the spirit of its founding father through the annual Herbert DeSouza Memorial Lectures. A galaxy of luminaries have shone on the college campus for these lectures. Prominent educationists like V.V. John, Yashwant Shukla, well-known economists like Dr. C. Rangarajan and Vadilal Dagli, public servants like T.N. Seshan and Arundhati Ghosh, prominent writers like Uma Shankar Joshi and Father Wallace, activists like Achyut Yagnik, and many other personalities have delivered lectures in this series. One of the brightest stars in our galaxy of speakers at the Herbert DeSouza Memorial Lecture Series is our speaker for today, the Honorable Dr. Shashi Tharoor. I conclude this introduction to Father Herbert DeSouza with a tribute to him in these lines by Longfellow. Lives of great men all remind us we can make our lives sublime, and departing, leave behind us footprints in the sands of time. Similar footprints in the sands of time are also imprinted by our speaker for today, who I will now introduce. We are immensely privileged to have with us Dr. Shashi Tharoor, MP. What words can I utter to describe the brilliance of this great thinker, political leader, philanthropist, author, orator, mover and shaker? Yet I think the one compliment that I would want to give him, nay, the one compliment that he would love to receive, is to be called an Indian. A thorough, profound, brilliant Indian. Who doesn't know Dr. Tharoor? A fourth-term member of Parliament for Thiruvananthapuram, best-selling author of 26 books, former Under-Secretary General of the United Nations, former Minister of State for Human Resource Development and for External Affairs in the Government of India, winner of numerous awards, including Pravasi Bharatiya Samman, Commonwealth Writers' Prize, the Sahitya Academy Award for English non-fiction, chairperson of the Parliament's Standing Committee on External Affairs. There is so much more to this list of achievements. I could go on to read out Dr. Tharoor's immensely impressive CV, and believe me, it is gobsmackingly impressive. I could go on to speak about his decades at the United Nations, his PhD at the young age of 22, his honorary doctorates from not one, not two, but 3 universities internationally, his recognition in India and other nations by their highest honors. The list is staggering. But I'm sure you will find all of that information online in open sources. Instead, what I think we need to carry home with us today are these details about our speaker. Dr. Tharoor has spent the greatest part of his literary and public life articulating, defending, and championing the inclusive idea of India anchored in our Constitution. He has proved himself a trailblazer in using social media as an instrument of political interaction. Today, he has over 8.4 million followers on Twitter, making him one of the most popular Indian politicians. And so, very importantly and fittingly, his voice, his vocabulary, his viewpoints continue to move national conversations, international dialogue, and global exchange. Ladies and gentlemen, I am honored and humbled simultaneously and paradoxically in presenting to you the amazing Dr. Shashi Tharoor. May I request Father Durai Fernand, the provincial of the Gujarat Jesuit province, to offer Dr. Tharoor a traditional Gujarati shawl as a memento, as a sign of respect that is customarily used for honored guests. May I request Father Anthony Pichai, the rector of St. Xavier's College, to offer a bouquet of flowers to our celebrated and esteemed guest. May I request Father Dr. Vinayak Jadhav to offer a memento to Dr. Shashi Tharoor. This is a handmade memento, sir, that uses the art of what we call Lipan Kam, which is a traditional art form in Gujarat. They say when a student is ready, the teacher appears. I know that many of us are not actually students, and perhaps Dr. Tharoor is not really a teacher, but that's the feeling right now. Dr. Tharoor, we are ready for you. May I request the other dignitaries on the dais to take their seats in the audience, please, and Dr. Tharoor would now come to the podium to enlighten us. Ladies and gentlemen, the Honorable Dr. Shashi Tharoor.
Wonderful. What's your name?
My name is Jean, sir. Thank you.
No, I'm happy with this. Maybe during the Q&A, but not right now. This is fine. Father Vinayak, Father Durai, Father Anthony, our marvelous Mistress of Ceremonies, Jean, distinguished guests, and students, since we all are, I hope, constantly studying and learning as we go through life. Good evening to all of you. It's a pleasure to be at St. Xavier's College to deliver the Father Herbert DeSouza Memorial Lecture. I too am a product of a St. Xavier's Collegiate High School in Calcutta, but I discovered to my horror that you call yourselves Xavierites. We are Xaverians, I insist. But I do have a connection to you Xavierites because I'm a father of twin sons, one of whom married a girl, both of whose parents are graduates of St. Xavier's, Ahmedabad. So two Xavierites in the family, one Xaverian, I'm outnumbered anyway. But I have had the great honor of a Jesuit education at Campion School in Bombay, before St. Xavier's in Calcutta. And I must say, everything I've read about Father Herbert DeSouza seems to me to represent the finest of that Jesuit tradition of education. There is, Father Vinayak was saying he doesn't like to read lectures. I'm in the same boat, I prefer to speak. But on an occasion as prestigious as this, in honor of such a great orator, I too have chosen to come with a text to anchor my words in this lecture to all of you, though I gather we'll have a question and answer session afterwards. It's, I think, appropriate to begin by reflecting on the legacy of Father Herbert DeSouza, a visionary Jesuit, an eloquent orator, and a pioneer who harnessed the power of media to advance education and human development. From the corridors of St. Xavier's to the global lecture circuits, from the solemn halls of Rome to the vibrant media landscape of Gujarat, Father DeSouza was a man whose intellect, compassion, and unwavering commitment to social uplift left an indelible mark on the many lives he touched. His tenure as president of St. Xavier's was marked by a steadfast dedication to academic excellence and holistic education. His journey then took him to Rome, where he shaped global discourse on Jesuit education, later to the US, where his eloquence, wit, and deep literary knowledge, as we've heard, made him one of the most sought-after speakers of his time. And yet, for all his global influence, his heart remained firmly committed to India, to this institution, and to Gujarat. Recognizing the transformative power of education, he believed that learning should not be confined to the classroom, nor should universities be mere institutions of instruction. He saw them as centers of inquiry, platforms for critical thinking, and engines for social transformation. Through his pioneering work in Gurjar Vani and the Xavier Center for Culture and Communication, he sought to expand the very definition of education, blending traditional scholarship with the power of media, ensuring that knowledge was not just acquired, but shared, debated, and used as a tool for empowerment. While the COVID pandemic we've all lived through did certainly unleash a turbulent period for our education institutions and our student community, including the challenges of the digital divide, which came up with online education, uncertainty surrounding examinations, learning outcome losses. We've gone through this whole list. We know that not all that currently ails our universities and our students has been a byproduct of the pandemic alone. But there is no denying that existing problems, the global trend in slashing state support for universities, reduced allocations for research and innovation, and the quality of output being produced, the over-bureaucratization of academia and the quality of what is coming out, the over-regulation of campuses. We are by and large over-regulated and under-resourced, and I think that is very clearly a problem that afflicts all universities across India. And of course, the growing threats to the freedom of academic expression. All of these are likely to spike considerably if we are not able to find answers to these challenges today. Now, the idea of a university is a phrase which, as Father Vinayak has already pointed out, is most famously associated with the two-volume collection of essays with that title by Cardinal John Henry Newman that were first published in 1852. The idea of a university in which teaching and research were combined in the search for impartial truth reached classic form in 19th century Germany, associated with the famous Humboldt model, which became the dominant global model of a university, a place with intellectual and academic freedom, university autonomy, the growth of independent disciplines with their own standards and priorities, and increasing internationalism. This was the model that Newman arguably had in mind when he wrote the idea of a university. But don't forget that Cardinal Newman was primarily speaking of religious education, and though he was doing that, he showed remarkable foresight in articulating the concept of the modern-day university as an intellectual and liberal engine for contemporary society, intended to serve as a haven for a community of thinkers for whom the cultivation of the intellect could be reasonably pursued for its own sake. And the for its own sake are a vital part of his words. Even more than a century and a half later, his powerful arguments for the value of a liberal education and the principal duties of a university are well worth reminding ourselves of today. To Cardinal Newman, the purpose of education was not to be merely preoccupied with the gathering of knowledge, wisdom, or even scientific temper, that phrase from our Constitution, but one that was motivated by the cultivation of the intellect and a universal knowledge that aided the enlargement of the mind or illumination. I'm using his words. What would this imply for a university? To quote the Cardinal in his own words again, he believed that as a matter of history, the business of a university is to make this intellectual culture its direct scope, or to employ itself in the education of the intellect, just as the work of a hospital lies in healing the sick or the wounded, or a riding or fencing school, or of a gymnasium in exercising the limbs, or an almshouse in aiding and solacing the old, of an orphanage in protecting innocence, of a penitentiary in restoring the guilty. So just as those are the core functions of those institutions, Newman felt that a university's job was to cultivate the intellect. Now, this departure from the utilitarian view of education as a means of economic and social progress has faced criticism. Newman's essays emerged in an era when universities were largely accessible only to those with social, political, or evangelical capital, predominantly the gentry or the church. In India, too, the finest universities, still aligned with the traditional Newman idea, are often perceived as bastions of social privilege, detached from economic and employment realities. Newman's vision also excludes polytechnics or vocational education. In fact, critics have noted that he offers little guidance on striking a balance between the pursuit of knowledge and equipping students with practical, employable skills. Nor does he address the fundamental issue of how such an enterprise should be financed, an omission that underscores his limitations as, in the words of a critic, the ultimate ivory tower dweller. Increasingly, demands for research to be economically and socially relevant, to help students find work in the real world, have challenged the classic Newman view of untrammeled academic freedom and the cultivation of the intellect. What policy should be pursued to preserve democratic access to the best higher education and to match individual talent to intellectual aspirations as well as societal needs? Universities juggle demands for credentials, skills, and innovation, but remain rooted in their traditional role, engaging with values, culture, and politics, rather than caring about the market. To be, in short, the ivory towers of intellectualism that are increasingly disdained by hard-headed employers. Now, for most families in India, these utilitarian concerns are realities that we are particularly familiar with. Perhaps more so because the fact is that in our country, our educational system has historically served as a beacon of hope in a tumultuous world for millions, even if arguably the system in itself has not yet become our greatest glory. It is, of course, imperative to remember our humble beginnings on the eve of Indian independence. Britain's crippling and debilitating colonial rule left us with only 16% literacy at the time of independence, barely 30 universities in the entire country, about 700 colleges, and a total enrollment of just 4 lakh students in the entire country. While India struggled for the next 5 decades as the poorest, most illiterate, the most malnourished, and the least gender-sensitive major country in the world, with over half the world's illiterate adults and 40% of the world's out-of-school children residing in our country, the trajectory of our purpose to our the trajectory of our progress to our present state is remarkable. What our first Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru, brought to this was a certain vision and relentless efforts, and we embarked on an educational revolution, building a vast system that nurtured scientific and technological excellence, deep humanist thought, and boundless creativity. When I came into government, unfortunately for a very brief while as the Minister for Education, I found the initial catechism in our education policy that dominated our higher education system were 2 E's, expansion and equity. Expansion in the number of institutions and equitable access to them for those who had previously been denied educational opportunities because of their caste, their gender, their religion, their region, their tribal status, whatever. In the process, perhaps we didn't give enough attention to the 3rd E in the catechism, which was excellence. I then added a 4th E as minister, and that's endured, I gather, amongst my successors, and that is the E of employability. And I'll come back to this larger theme in a minute. Now, there have been shining exceptions, of course, to the complaint about lack of excellence. There's no question that today's Americans speak about IITs with the same reverence they accord to MIT. The image of India has changed from that of a backward developing country to a sophisticated land that produces engineers and computer experts. The old stereotype of Indians as one of snake charmers and sadhus. Now it's changed so much that I was accosted by an anxiously perspiring European at an airport in Europe, Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam, saying, "Oh, you're Indian, can you help me fix my laptop?" I mean, the entire thinking now is that every Indian must be a software guru or a computer geek. Now, in 2025, when I look back on my days as a young graduate, I think of how few were the options available to us as college students in the 1960s and 70s, as compared to the plethora of opportunities presented to graduating youngsters nowadays. Wider options to study, wider employment opportunities to prepare ourselves for, and especially in higher education, there are many more subjects available to pursue and courses that never existed during my college days, as well as on-campus recruitments from companies and from professions that had not even been dreamt of in my youth. Evolution means that India must keep up with the world. The IITs have now launched certificate programs on artificial intelligence and machine learning. One has already set up a center for artificial intelligence. These will mushroom in the years ahead. At its very foundation, our Prime Minister, Nehru, had called IITs India's future in the making. And now young professionals from these institutes are indeed making global history, young professionals with IIT degrees. But we still have a long way to go with that 4th E I mentioned, employability. To meet the forces of the markets, the demands of research, the pursuit of usable knowledge, and the imperative of building an equitable society. We're suffering from a systemic problem of a skill mismatch between the qualifications we're giving our children and the jobs available for them to undertake. The skill mismatch has seen some improvement in certain sectors over time, but chronic problems persist. I remember reading with horror not too long ago about the Madhya Pradesh Police Department advertising 14,000 constable posts, which required an 8th grade pass, 8th standard pass. The department advertised 14,000 posts. They got 9 lakh applicants for these 14,000 jobs. Among them were nearly 10,000 engineering graduates and a dozen PhD holders, plus 1,90,000 graduates and 15,000 postgraduates. And this is, as I say, a job of a constable with a minimal school education required. There are similar anecdotes you can find about every menial job advertised by the railways, the state and central governments, the public sector undertakings. Why? Because we are releasing graduates into an ecosystem that does not know how to use them. They settle for a constable post as an alternative to frying pakoras, as some who ought to know better have advised them to do. Therefore, even as I speak to you today as someone who has benefited from a liberal education, right from my schooling throughout my university years, I recognize the natural inclination in India to make higher education more utilitarian, to align it with the demands of what we hope will once again be a rapidly growing economy in a globalizing world. Given the record high unemployment assailing our country, sluggish economic growth, and the lasting impact of the Trump tariffs, there is a compelling case for equipping graduates to navigate an increasingly challenging job market while strengthening long-term resilience. After all, a university graduate employed in a stable profession was undoubtedly better positioned during the pandemic, for example, than an artist, an actor, or a scholar of 18th century poetry. While the concern is valid and one I fully understand, I would argue that the fundamental aim of higher education, particularly liberal education, is to equip graduates for any profession they may enter. As I've often noted in discussions with our engineering institutions, India produces approximately 1.5 million engineering graduates each year. About 60% of them actively seek employment, but not all of them meet industry standards in terms of readiness. Simply put, if we focus entirely on subjects like engineering because we think that'll help them get jobs, we are wrong. Associations like the CII, ASSOCHAM, FICCI have found that most of our engineering graduates are not ready for the marketplace. And what is worse is what happens afterwards. The organization that I conceived and led for 6 years in the Congress Party, the All India Professionals Congress, conducted a survey amongst 10 or 20,000 Kerala engineering graduates. And they found that 66% of them were doing jobs that did not require an engineering degree. That is the situation we are unleashing our engineers to. Either they know things that are not relevant to the marketplace, or what they know is not required by employers, and as a result, they have to essentially cast aside the discipline they have learned to do other kinds of work. Now, one of the major challenges that would be prompted by universities discarding the liberal arts for more technical and utilitarian studies and objectives is that it will leave our countries with a generation of graduates who are trained to look at the problems of the world through absolute and non-negotiable principles. This works, this doesn't work. This switch turns off, this switch turns on. There's only one way of doing things and no other, which is essentially what engineering teaches. The danger of this kind of thinking was borne out a couple of decades ago when an Oxford study in 2006 or 7 claimed that of all those associated with terrorist incidents up to that time, between 1990 and 2005, 96% were engineers. So though no one was saying that most engineers are terrorists, they did draw the conclusion that most terrorists were engineers. Now, I don't know if that study has held up particularly well in the multiple terrorist incidents that have occurred since it was conducted. But the lesson is clear. A mind rigidly trained in either or binaries and unexposed to the humanities is more susceptible to believing in fundamentals, and that includes political and religious fundamentalism. It is a short step from studying the predictable laws of engineering to following an ideology or a creed that also seems to the engineering-trained mind to be infused with immutable laws. If our graduates were rooted in the idea that there's only one way to think and work, they are likely to apply that habit of mind and thought to their understanding of human beings, of religion, of politics, of ideology, where only one worldview is true and right and everyone else is wrong, where only one worldview is patriotic and everything else is anti-national, where only one view will lead you to God and everyone else is damned to the inferno in any case. To my mind, if our universities churned out legions of such graduates, it would certainly have a devastating impact on our communities, particularly in today's turbulent world where I fear that the increasing move towards populism, isolationism, and the economic and cultural backlash against globalization is only getting accelerated, as we've seen since Mr. Trump's oath of office in the White House. In fact, I've suggested we may well see a process of deglobalization, characterized by trade restrictions, the repatriation of production and supply chains, and the hollowing out of international and multilateral institutions. As I have often remarked, the human mind is like a parachute. It functions best when it's open. You don't want to jump off a plane with a closed parachute, and you don't want to enter the world with a closed mind. I don't think we can afford to produce graduates who have closed minds. The traditional utilitarian approach in India has long prioritized rote memorization, compelling students to absorb what is taught to them in their textbooks and by their teachers, and then regurgitate this in examinations. If this method was already outdated when I was a student, it is entirely obsolete for today's aspiring graduates. In a 21st century world marked by division, conflict, and entrenched identities, what we need is not merely a well-filled mind. Any fact can now be retrieved within seconds on your mobile phone or 2 clicks of a mouse on a computer. Rather, what we need, instead of a well-filled mind, is a well-formed mind. We need individuals who can engage with the unfamiliar, facts they've never heard before, new problems they've never encountered, discern patterns, grasp underlying complexities, and develop thoughtful, innovative solutions to the challenges of our time. In other words, we want students who are not taught what to think, but are taught how to think. That how to think is what is going to give them the opportunity to deal with the unfamiliar. There's an Oxford Martin School study quite recently, a few years ago, which projected that by 2030, nearly 30% of the jobs in the world will be in fields that did not exist when the study was conducted. Now, how do you train somebody for a job that doesn't exist? There is no textbook that's been written because the job still hasn't been thought of, but it's being thought of with dizzying speed. And what's interesting is that the challenge for today's universities is to prepare their students to grasp and grapple with the unknown. Because these jobs, I mean, since the Oxford Martin study was done, you've had the advent of artificial intelligence. There's a whole series of jobs coming around that, including jobs to teach artificial intelligence. But no one could have imagined those jobs when that study was conducted. We've seen now the ways in which new skills, new techniques have to be absorbed and directed. Now, the purpose of university education, therefore, is increasingly to help people, help students to decipher the unfamiliar, to bridge distances, to render the novel comprehensible. This well-formed mind I talked about, enriched by history, by literature, by the study of human behavior, is ultimately better equipped to navigate uncertainty than one confined to the rigid certitudes of technical training. So my submission to this distinguished gathering is that the future of our universities, and indeed of our higher education system, depends on striking a careful balance between the practical demands of utilitarian education and the broader liberal foundations that expand intellectual horizons and cultivate critical inquiry. If we can embrace the new world without discarding Cardinal Newman entirely, we will be able to find that balance. We must be wary in the process of a growing tendency amongst policymakers to make liberal arts and the humanities, quote unquote, more relevant, reducing them to mere tools for producing more efficient white-collar workers, rather than using them to foster deep-rooted thinkers. Equally concerning is the attempt to repurpose those disciplines for ideological ends, turning history into a vehicle for legitimizing a particular kind of past, political science into lessons on chauvinistic nationalism, or English literature into mere global communication skills for call center employees. Such distortions do not expand intellect, but undermine higher education itself, leaving little room for the imaginative, the ruminative, the philosophical, and the theoretical. And this is all the more compounded by today's obsession with social media, which has sadly not only contributed to a reduction in the attention span of the average student and the average adult, but has also deprived young people of the habits of deep, lengthy reading and complex engagement with ideas that are so fundamental, ultimately, to meaningful thought and intellectual inquiry. So this calls for a firm commitment to academic freedom and the clear separation of higher education institutions from external influences that seek to shape them for ulterior purposes. The Hindi scholar Apurvanand, for example, has warned of increasing efforts to impose exclusionary ideologies in academic spaces, which he argues undermine democracy by weakening society's ability to hold those in power accountable. He distinguishes between freedom of expression and academic freedom, emphasizing that while citizens may not always have the means to critically assess those in power, academics, through their professional training, their intellectual expertise, have a responsibility to think freely for the sake of the public. Academic freedom, therefore, is not merely a right, but a fundamental necessity for the advancement of knowledge and the preservation of democratic values. Now, this argument is crucial to understanding the future of universities. In today's globalized world and diverse democracy, students will inevitably encounter others who do not share their beliefs, their cultural practices, their customs. Yet the rejection of liberal cosmopolitanism has led to an increasingly fractured society, where many in leadership view diversity as a problem rather than as a strength. They promote a monolithic vision of the nation, defined by faith, community, and language, and demanding social conformity. I would like the university to be the last bastion of the diversity of all of these practices. And amidst the rise of divisive politics, where entire groups are often stigmatized as the other with a capital O, an alarming lack of empathy has emerged. Too few can recognize that despite differences in religion, race, and language, we share the same dreams, the same fears, the same hopes. Many struggle to broaden their minds to grasp both the vast complexity of human experience and the universality of human aspirations. In producing such graduates, our universities have regrettably failed us. It is vital that our universities are therefore courageous enough to remain as open and free spaces, where dissent and multiple worldviews are welcome and cherished for their complexity and diversity, and which ensures that in our rambunctious, chaotic, and magnificent democracy, spaces and channels are always kept open for all points of view. The future of our universities must be rooted in developing a generation of leaders that is more ready to deal with the national and global order, a world where multiple realities coexist, where alternative worldviews and convictions have to be encouraged and negotiated with, and where students are taught to look beyond themselves and their immediate surroundings to the reality of interdependence and peaceful coexistence. In fact, there's a British educationist who's written about some of this, Robert Anderson, who outlined 3 possible futures for the university model. First, he said it could be expanded across mass higher education through resource-intensive and vocational training. Second, he said you can abandon it in favor of a purely utilitarian managerial approach. And third, universities could embrace diverse missions while ensuring fair access to research-led institutions, a principle threatened by privatization and market-driven fees. And Anderson, for a Brit, points to the American model, where differentiation has preserved the pursuit of knowledge and liberal education more effectively, he argues, than in Europe. What I get from this is that we should probably see the idea of a university not as a fixed list of immutable characteristics, as Newman did, but, in Anderson's words, as, quote, a set of tensions permanently present but resolved differently according to time and place. I like that. These tensions would include those between teaching and research, between autonomy and accountability. I know that Xavier says autonomous in brackets right after its name, that's great. Between intellectual integrity and socio-economic relevance. But they should also feature legitimate debates in our country about benchmarking Indian universities against international scholarly communities, about their role in shaping our national identity, in exploring, defending, and expanding our national culture. The idea of a university must reconcile the tensions between the inevitable connection of public universities with the state and private ones with the most powerful and richest corporations, versus the need to maintain critical distance between reproducing the existing social, economic, and occupational structures against expanding it from below by promoting the marginalized and excluded through affirmative action to ensure social mobility. Between serving the economy versus providing a space free from the immediate utilitarian pressures dictated by the job market. I know these seem to be difficult to reconcile, but we need to do that. Above all, there is a chronic and perhaps permanent tension between universities as places devised to encourage open and critical attitudes against society's expectation that universities will impart useful qualifications and employable skills in the service of India's future. Obviously, we have to resolve that tension too. And a balance has to be struck that seeks the impossible, to reconcile seemingly incompatible objectives with the ethos of commitment to a better future for a better India. We must be far-sighted enough to recognize that at its core in a democratic society, our universities must evolve into spaces where an ideal version of democracy is itself allowed to thrive. In other words, our universities must become the staging ground for experiments in developing the most principled version of our democratic ethos, and by extension a microcosm of what our democratic society could one day be. A place where you're free to think, and if I can say this in a Jesuit college, where you're free to think heresy and not be punished for it. Of course, I meant political heresy, but you get the point. We cannot, of course, teach and reach these ideals if we do not actively strive to ensure that our campuses are inclusive and representative. After all, no democratic model can sustain itself if it does not carve out spaces for all voices, no matter how big or small, to be heard. This is not just what we try to rectify through instruments like affirmative action, reservations, need-based scholarship programs, which are all very important, but a commitment to really taking stock of the barriers to access and inclusion that permeate all levels of our society. Take, for instance, the issue of online learning that was the norm during the height of the pandemic. We live in a world brought to us by Facebook, Google, and Twitter, but we also live in a world where over 2.6 billion individuals do not have access to the internet, including 1 billion children, for whom it will not be possible to either work remotely or learn remotely. According to UNESCO, globally, only just over half of households, 55%, have an internet connection. In the developed world, 87% are connected, compared to 47% in developing nations, and just 19% in the least developed countries. Now, these harsh realities, compounded by infrastructure gaps, lack of electricity, unreliable Wi-Fi, and teachers unprepared for digital learning or even for guiding digital learning, have created insurmountable barriers for the marginalized, sometimes driving them to despair. There was a tragic incident during the pandemic that has haunted me for a long time, when a class 10 Dalit student in Kerala, a bright topper, she was always first in her class, immense potential. The COVID lockdown happened, classes went online. Her father was a daily wage earner. He suddenly had no wages anymore because there was no daily work available during the lockdown. When many of us drew the attention of the left government in Kerala to the fact that many children could not go online, they said they would broadcast the classes on free-to-air television. But this poor family didn't have a working television. The one they had was broken. They didn't have the money to repair it. This poor girl was cut off from those online classes. With it, she felt she was cut off from her future. She saw all the other students way ahead of her, and she took her own life. It's a terribly painful story, and perhaps there weren't too many such examples, thank God, but it was a terribly painful moment. And I remember one of the things I did immediately after, as soon as we were able to interact with people, was to launch a drive to collect internet-enabled mobile phones for poor children in government schools. And we got quite a few donated from people, for people in my constituency. But this is still the reality for many people in India. We live in Kerala as a much more prosperous state than many. And these are realities that educationists cannot afford to forget while we sit here protected by our privilege and discussing what a university means for all of us. But it doesn't have to be this way. Online education and e-learning has its limitations. It overlooks the great value of campus interactions for students across social classes, across regional divides, religious divides, caste divides, and the comradeship that arises from shared experience and shared learning. I have no doubt that it was a blessing when the lockdown ended and colleges and campuses could come back to life. If our universities can be places where we can come together and develop these free spaces where the social barriers of class and caste are left behind, and where instead young Indians are given the tools to lead an empowered life, a space where narrow-minded and exclusionary identities are replaced by willingness to accept differences and cherish the diversity not just of identity but of thought and belief, a space that is confident enough to look at its wealth of differences as a strength and not so insecure as to look at it as a weakness that must be rooted out. A space where the administration is attuned to the aspirations of the students, the next generation of India's leaders, and where those young minds, the engines of our democratic and pluralist society, are not subsumed only by personal ambition or the commercial rat race, but are invested in not just improving their minds, but in the successes of those around them, if we manage to do all of this, we can develop an idea of the university that remains open, inclusive, and representative, and yet anchored in the realities of India. An idea that will become the engine of tomorrow's India. If we can manage to do this, I am confident that the India of tomorrow will be carried forward by a generation of leaders that will have been empowered by their university life to take our country to new heights. I believe it can be done, and I'm confident that you, the bearers of the legacy of Father Herbert DeSouza, are the ones who can help us to do it. Thank you very much for your patient listening. Jai Hind. All yours.
Thank you so much. I think a louder round of applause. That was amazing. Thank you, sir. The Greek mathematician and physicist Archimedes famously said, "Give me a lever and a fulcrum long enough and I can move the world." So you have used the lever of language and the fulcrum of your thoughts, and you have moved our worlds. Thank you. Thank you so much. It's now time for us to interact with Dr. Tharoor. I'm sure there are many questions in the audience, an audience that could be said to represent the intelligentsia of the city. And to moderate the open session, I now hand over the proceedings to Father Dr. Sunil Mekwon, the Vice Principal of Arts at St. Xavier's College. Father Sunil.
Thank you, that's most kind. And you really have a knack for the apt quote. Very touched, very impressed. You have a knack for the apt quote. I've heard 3 or 4 today, well done.
Thank you, sir. I'll take them possibly after the exchange.
Thank you, Dr. Tharoor, for your stimulating and challenging talk.
My pleasure, Father.
Yes, it was equally delightful and challenging. So now to continue to savor these thoughts, ideas, apprehensions, and premonitions that Dr. Tharoor has shared with us this evening, we shall segue into a Q&A. And may I request our distinguished guests this evening to keep your questions pertinent to the talk and the related ideas, so as we have a truly meaningful, rewarding, and instructive session today. With this, I open it to Q&A. Please raise your hand. It's difficult for me to see, so I'll come up here. Sir, please. Mic to sir.
Thank you so much for very eloquent discourse on the idea of university. I am Dinesh Avasthi. I head a largest private university in this city with 21,000 students and about 850 professors.
Can you hold the mic a little closer?
Now, whatever you have said is perfect. Probably the ideal university should be that where people have freedom to think and not busy in nuts and bolts. But unfortunately, it's not happening.
Right.
Now, I have some other concern being heading that university, is that the advent of disruptive technologies which are coming, will there be universities? I mean, you have professors of Harvard or MIT in your room. You have all that Coursera's and everything which are taught there, and students, the greatest damage which is being done by the Googles and all that, and now ChatGPT, is that my students have stopped thinking capacity. Now they can't think.
Excuse me, sir. Could you please ask your question.
I mean, what will be your take on the technology, the university with walls and concrete, and these technologies which are coming, which have just hampered the thought process and capacity to think among the students? Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. It's a very good question. I must admit that I am not as much of a doomsayer yet as the second half of your observation implied. I was just telling a journalist today, I was looking back on my own days writing my doctoral dissertation for my PhD. I spent hours in dusty, musty libraries, finding the right books, pulling them out, looking for the bits that I wanted to extract. And then I would have to laboriously copy out on scraps of paper or index cards the actual lines I was going to quote, look down, mark the pages, write down the title, the publisher, the year, and so on, so that my footnotes would be accurate. The intellectual contribution I was making was in looking, in knowing where to look, what to extract from what I had found, and how I would use it in my argument. The rest was pure drudgery. Actually having to write all this out and do all this laborious work. If today an artificial intelligence program can do this for me without my having to sit down and write it all out and then eventually type it when I'm typing my dissertation, I don't see the harm in it, provided I'm not outsourcing the thinking also to the artificial intelligence program. And that is the challenge we're finding at levels so far of undergraduate term papers or high school homework, is that children are basically asking the question to ChatGPT that their teacher has asked them and letting ChatGPT write the paper. That, I would agree, would be a disaster. But at the more demanding levels of intellectual inquiry, you basically will have to come up with original insights of your own to justify, excuse me, to justify your own, what's the word I want, your own intellectual contribution to that exercise. So teachers and professors will have to change their own methods of evaluation. I also feel that where you're resorting to a technological tool merely, for example, to brush up your language, first of all, it's very easy to tell the difference. I even see it on WhatsApp messages to me. When something has been said by somebody that has clearly come off the internet, the English is flawless, the logic is there, it's all paragraphed and worked out. And then he adds in a separate message his own insight or observation in atrocious English, and you know the difference immediately. So that's not difficult to figure out. It is, it seems to me, on the one hand, a useful tool. Would you not rather receive a well-written letter than a badly written one? Would you rather not have a coherently expressed argument than one where the person understands the argument but doesn't have the vocabulary to put it right? I think from the point of view of the recipient also, there is no great shame in these technologies being used to burnish the quality of what people are sending you and writing. The big challenge for all of you in the education business is figuring out how much of it is the student's own mind and how much of it is, how much is the student's natural intelligence and how much is the computer's artificial intelligence. But that is a skill that teachers will have to acquire very quickly, because otherwise they will be made a mockery of. And you can very easily, in school certainly, teachers are already making sure that when very good homework comes in, they also question the student to see how much the student has understood, how much has been done. Look, let's face it, there was a time when kids would turn in homework that their parents had helped them with. Today they're turning in homework that a computer has helped them with. That's the main difference. You still, as a teacher, have the responsibility to ensure that you have been able to understand how much the student has really understood. Once you do that, I think this fear will be much less relevant. I take your point, it's a widely expressed concern, but I'm not prepared to give up on this because I think all technological advancement can be both good and bad. And I think that what's good should be preserved and valued because it makes life easier for everybody.
And sir, yeah, we are already facing that dilemma of allowing the AI and new technology at the same time promoting their individuality and creativity. So we'll have, moving on, another question from an educationist, Father Suresh. I'll come to you, sir.
Dr. Shashi, I want to personally thank you for using the language which we could understand. Thank
I
you.
always use language people can understand. Do not believe the caricatures of my political...
Sir, he is from science.
So not being. So, you know, you have been a Jesuit product, and I agree with the fathers here that we are supposed to produce graduates who meant to be at the service of the humanity. One of the difficulties we face in starting the course, before we start a course, we are told to do a feasibility study. And that depends on what is the employability. And because of that, today, to create a subject or to bring in all the aspects that belong to an organism of a university becomes very difficult for us. I want your suggestion on that.
No, you're quite right, but you know, not every subject lends itself to employability. If you're doing a course on artificial intelligence, sure, it's about employability. If you're doing a course on robotics or machine learning, it's all about factories and doing work. If you're doing a course on English literature, surely the only employability you're fit for after that is to be a professor of English literature. And there are not too many of those in demand these days. So you have to understand that the purpose of your teaching English literature is to help people to think, to appreciate the great complexities and diversities of human experience, to enjoy and relish the ways in which that experience can be expressed and communicated through the art of the story, and at the same time to be able, through that process, to become a finer mind, a more cultivated mind, a more civilized individual. Those are not things that can be measured in the job market. But even somebody who has only studied English literature, they may come into, for whatever reason, a job that requires no English literature, they will approach it with a mind that has benefited from studying English literature. That ultimately is the Newmanian justification. Their intellect has been, if you like, sort of curated better through that process. But it cannot be directly justified in terms of employment unless you're producing teachers of English literature. So that's a distinction. It depends very much on the specific kind of course that you're asked to justify. There are some courses that have to be done by that justification, but even then those justifications can be dubious. I'll give you an example. You probably would, if you were training your students in how to use a television studio equipment in a mass communication school. I think you have a communication school here, right? The question still arises, is that what they're going to find in the real workplace? I was invited by a Kerala channel to inaugurate their new studios, and I went there and I saw a couple of young people in this very impressive room with a bank full of screens everywhere and lots of buttons and gizmos that they were playing with and digital lights flashing and so on. And I said, so what did you study? And they said, we went to a school of mass communication. I said, oh, then all this must be pretty easy for you. You've seen it before. And they said, no, sir, everything we studied on has been long since out of date. This is much newer than anything we learned in school. That's the challenge. And this is widely true. When I was minister, we introduced a rule, I don't know if it's still there, that says that you cannot open a polytechnic anywhere in India. We will not authorize it unless you have a tie-up with an actually functioning industry within a 30-kilometer radius of that polytechnic. Because our polytechnics were full of professors teaching from 30-year-old, 40-year-old textbooks on techniques and methods and equipment that is no longer used in the real world anymore. The same with our ITIs. These are the things that we need to change. So you can justify it, you can probably create a polytechnic, say we're going to teach all these useful skills for which there's a need, but in practice what you're teaching is not actually going to help them to get a job, then what's the point?
Right, right. And sir, I believe humanities is timeless in that sense. No, we still teach Shakespeare today and get a big pay. There was one of the first hands to go up there. I think it was Manav and Atman, sir. I'll come to you, Souza.
Thank you for such an insightful talk, by the way.
Little higher. Hold the
Hi,
mic.
is this better?
Yeah.
Thank you for such an insightful talk.
Thank you.
So, knowledge expansion and innovation undeniably requires a lot of funding. Universities right now need to perform a lot of cross-sectoral partnerships and whatnot, get money from think tanks, the government, foundations. This leaves a lot of room for the funders to form an influence in the narrative that gets pushed and what knowledge gets expanded, what sort of innovation happens. There's a huge responsibility that universities hold here to keep these things open. Are there any tangible advices from your end how universities can navigate this web?
You know, this question of funding is a very serious one because obviously governments have to do the bulk of it for our public universities. And I'm afraid the amount of money that the governments are prepared to put into education has not increased appreciably. Far from it, the percentage of GDP government is spending on education has gone down. The percentage of the government budget has gone down. And many of our state government universities are in actually worse shape than they used to be 50 years ago. So what's happening is the slack has been picked up by a lot of private universities, which indeed offer all of the things you want, the latest state-of-the-art technologies, facilities, techniques, subjects, all of that, but they charge an arm and a leg for it. And of course, it's only the affluent, that small sliver of our society who can afford to get into them. I mean, our country is so vast that even that small sliver of society means there are more people applying for a limited number of seats than otherwise would be the case. But we haven't yet developed a culture that, for example, exists in American universities, of giving the universities a sufficient endowment that means will not be a barrier to entry, where you will get scholarships if you're bright enough to get in. If that was the case, perhaps one would object less to this, because you could say that, yes, anybody, somebody from a very humble middle-class background, the son of a government clerk, whatever like that, can get into the best private universities because they will give him or her a scholarship to make up for the fact that the father doesn't earn that. I mean, when I got my first scholarship to go to the States, I was automatically earning, quote unquote, more than my father was to support a family of 5 in India. Those were the days where salaries were very low and executives were essentially supported through perks, as it was called, so that they wouldn't have to, my father didn't have to pay for his flat, his electricity bill, his car, his petrol, his driver, etc. But the salary, converted into American dollar terms, would not have been able to send me abroad. So I had to get a scholarship to do it. But at least those scholarships were available. Today in India, our private system offers practically no scholarships. And that, I think, is wrong. And one of the things that I would want to exhort, if I were in a position to do so, is that every private university must set aside a certain percentage of seats for scholarship students in order to expand their benefits to them. Otherwise, as far as government funding is concerned, I think we would have to urge our government to put more money into education. Prioritize. Education and public health, to my mind, are two extremely important areas for our tax money to be spent, where every government has not been spending enough on those two areas. And I hope that we can create more of a groundswell in our politics in favor of that. If the resources are there, opportunities will follow. But if not, we'll be stuck in these old-fashioned methods of studying, learning, teaching, and so on, because that's all they used to have before, and they can't afford to do anything new or anything better. That, I think, is the problem.
Thank you very much, sir. Now we'll move on to Professor
Since
Shah.
we're lady here for a change, we've
yes.
had a gender imbalance so far.
Sir, I said after her, she can go. Susan, is that your hand up? Is that fine, sir? Of course, ma'am.
Good evening, sir. I'm here.
Ah, yes, okay. Wrong gender, but go ahead.
My question is related to this Afghanization of higher education institutions. We have been witnessing this in India for last 10-15 years and in Gujarat for last 30 years. So how do you see the idea of a university in this kind of scenario, or how to cultivate the idea of critical thinking or academic freedom where students are not allowed to participate in protest? We have the evidence of Gujarat Vidyapeeth or JNU. So how do you see this scenario and the idea of a university?
I hope you're not trying to get St. Xavier's College into trouble for me answering that question. No, I have a profound problem with this, because I think, honestly, universities are precisely the places where young people grow up, discover what matters to them, what they care passionately about, what they're prepared to protest about and to fight for. And if we start stifling their ability to do that, we are stunting their growth as individuals. To my mind, there can be reasonable limits. You can't allow violence. You can't allow students intimidating, bullying, bashing up other students. You can't allow them to sort of ransack the principal's office. Those are all crimes under the penal code, under the laws of the land. But you should never deny students the right to march peacefully in protest, to hold protest gatherings, to address each other and argue a particular point of view. And I personally have seen too many who have grown out of this phase, but for whom this phase was an important part of their growing up. And I would never want to prevent them, because ultimately, how do you grow? I mean, the old joke is that, you know, we all make mistakes, and it is through our mistakes that we acquire experience and wisdom. And so the point is that there will be many of these protesters who are completely wrong-headed, but let them find out. I had two friends who were not just extreme leftist in my college and my batch, but were sort of left of the known left. I mean, they were sort of Trotskyites and so on. And both of them in adult life ended up as supporters of the BJP. Both of them. Both became MPs of the BJP. And these are both people who were in college with me. So I know their trajectory personally very well. But if we had denied them the right to have their ideological views, to express them, even to attend protest rallies and speak at protest rallies and so on, would we have actually done them any good? It's precisely because they held extreme views, learned what was right and wrong about them, and eventually came around to a different point of view, that we have the individuals that they became today. And to my mind, this is extremely important. I would never, ever agree to the stifling of protest. I would agree to the prohibition of unlawful activities, especially anything involving violence or incitement to violence. But short of that, the expression of views, as I partially jokingly said, the right to be a heretic is fundamental to my idea of the university. If you can't have a safe space on a university campus to say pretty much anything you like, however wrong-headed, however ill-informed it is, then why are you in a university? What is the university for? I feel very strongly that this is something we should always permit.
And we'll have the question from Susan, I believe. But just a gentle reminder, sir has shared many good ideas and insights with us and has challenged us. So let us remain focused on the discourse that's happening this evening. Over to you, Susan.
Thanks, Anil. Thank you, Dr. Tharoor, for, as usual, your eloquence as well as the wide variety of ideas. I was struck by the example you gave us of this young girl with human potential going to waste, killing herself because of, well, lack of funds. But you see, you said that you were able to do something about it. What is it that we can do when we can't do anything about it, when people in power choose to look the other way, when people who can do things, in fact, close down courses, close down universities, close down intellectual freedom? Oh, by the way, I teach English literature, so that's pretty much ouch. That's not working. What do we do when people whose job it is to ensure freedom of speech don't?
Tough question to which there is no easy answer. I mean, I would say that in a democracy, what we should do is work for, agitate for, and vote for an atmosphere that encourages and permits all this. But it's also true that perhaps the majority don't share our preoccupation with such freedoms. Perhaps academic freedom is not going to be a vote-winning demand. Maybe it's a preoccupation of educated elites. I don't know. But the best each of us can do is to stand up and speak out for what we believe in and be prepared to face the consequences. Now, many find that difficult to do, and I don't blame them. I'm far from being judgmental about that. But I will say that academic freedom, as I explained, and freedom of expression at the human level are both excuse me, fundamental elements in a democracy. And if we are a democracy, which we are and we claim to be, and our constitution supports, then we should exercise those freedoms which the constitution permits us to do. I'm not sure that's a satisfactory answer, but it's the best I can offer.
Thank you, sir. Yes, that was straight from the heart, I believe. So that's great enough. Yes, Fiona?
Good evening, sir. Welcome to St. Xavier's College. Big fan of yours, firstly.
Thank you.
And my question goes something like this, that with the rise of privatization,
Please hold the mic a little closer. I'm missing some
Closer,
of your words.
please.
Hello,
Hold
am
it
I
closer.
audible now?
Yeah, no, much better.
Yeah. With the rise of privatization in higher education, so what are your viewpoints on fair and equal access of good education to everyone in the future?
Sorry, whatization of education?
Privatization.
Privatization.
Privatization. Now, this is, we talked about it already. This is genuinely a problem because obviously at the moment we do have an enormous spurt in the growth of private universities. Remarkable. And some of extremely high quality. Places like Jindal University, Shiv Nadar University, Azim Premji University. I mean, there are a lot of these coming up which have got a very good reputation, which are already attracting symbiosis. I mean, there are half a dozen private institutions in India which are even getting global attention, making it to world rankings and so on. Mr. Ambani is coming up with a university. I have no doubt that people who have the money and the resources can set up in India institutions of high quality. But the problem remains who has access to them. So as I said in response to the earlier question, the only thing I can advocate is there must be some way in which scholarships are mandated, are necessary, so that at least some of the students coming into these universities will be able to use their private education as a life-transforming experience, because they'll get an opportunity they could not have afforded without that scholarship, without that support. I'd like to see that happening right across. I must say, because I benefited from that in America, and I see it so widespread in America, I would love to see more affluent institutions in India doing that. Now, you could argue America, they built it up over centuries. They all have big endowments, and the interest from those endowments they can afford to give in scholarships and so on. And we don't have that yet because all these universities are very new. I think Jindal is less than 15 years old, Shiv Nadar maybe slightly older but not much, etc., etc. So you could argue that some of these private, Ashoka University already got an outstanding reputation in liberal arts, and they're barely 10 years or 11 years old. So you're looking at a body of high quality institutions that haven't had the time to build up the resource base to offer scholarships. Well, my answer is tough. Then out of your current operating expenses, you have to earmark a certain percentage for scholarships. You cannot, in a country like ours with the great inequalities in our country, you cannot have private education that is purely elitist. And that is not even elitism of merit, but elitism of money. That is something that is very difficult to accept.
Yes, sir, and to mention it to you that one of the existential threats facing the Jesuit education today in India is privatization of education. We cannot go into it because we also have a target group to cater to at affordable rates. So that remains one of the issues we have. But we'll have a next question from Nivid Desai.
Thank you, Father. Thank you, Dr. Tharoor. It's an honor. My question to you would be something around the lines of teaching and learning. The schools teach a certain way, and the universities need to graduate from that level of teaching and to introduce a new pedagogy, if I may say so. And we have had different kinds of experiments around didactic versus discursive. What thought would you have about maybe the present situation of universities as we see it in India and abroad, as well as the future of university? How should teaching and learning both evolve with time?
Well, I partly addressed that in my remarks when I talked about the importance of not getting students to regurgitate what they have memorized by rote from the textbooks or the lectures. I've said that we should not teach them what to think, we should teach them how to think. I've said we need not a well-filled mind, but a well-formed mind. But I'd go even one step beyond that and say that in school, you're supposed to learn how to answer the questions. In college, you better learn how to question the answers. And I think this is very important. Now, methods of imparting knowledge, honestly, a lot of what we're doing in our country is still very woefully out of date. Whenever I address gatherings of school principals, and I had the joy, I think 2 of the last 3 years I was invited to address the Association of Jesuit Principals from all over the country, about 300, 400 of them. And I told them precisely this, that, you've got to move away from just telling the children. You've got to not just have them ask you why, you've also got to encourage them to ask you why not. You've got to get them into classroom discussions where they can actually think for themselves. Give them a topic you haven't taught them and make them present it in the class. Make them think, make them understand something. Have another student challenge what they've taught. Let them discuss it. These are methods that we just don't use enough in India in the school system. And we need to do that. I mean, both Steve Jobs and Bill Gates, when they were asked, what are the quality you most look for when you interview somebody for a job? They both said out-of-the-box thinking. Who does out-of-the-box thinking in India? In India, it's, the teacher says, when the student asks why or why not, the teacher says, because I told you so. Sit down. Repeat this in the examination. That's not good enough. We really have to encourage. The box, of course, is a conventional wisdom, what everyone has always done. The out-of-the-box thinking is thinking beyond. Now, of course, some of the out-of-the-box thinking might be crazy. So, if the teacher teaches in science class, the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, and the student stands up and says, why can't the sun one day rise in the west and set in the east? That may be out of the box, but it's also a wrong-headed question, and the teacher has to politely and firmly explain why that's simply inconceivable. But imagine a student, say 20 years ago, asking a science teacher, why does a car need petrol? And the science teacher talks about the internal combustion engine and how it has to move the wheels and the motor to get the vehicle moving forward. And the student is still not satisfied. Why does it have to be petrol? The teacher says, now you shut up and sit down. That's the answer. Write that in your exam. That student may have gone on to suddenly think, why can't I find ways of powering the car only through electricity? And indeed, we found out in the last 15, 20 years, the advent of the electric vehicle, the battery-operated car, and the transformation, which would have seemed a ridiculous question 20 years earlier, is now entirely not only feasible, but considered more desirable than the internal combustion engine. So that kind of thing of encouraging people to imagine what has not existed before and to see if what they have learned can equip them to move towards creating that which they have imagined. That's the kind of thinking that the world is moving on. We don't do enough of that. And the irony is we used to. For 1,000 years, we were world leaders in innovation, in scientific discovery. The world's first plastic surgery recorded in humanity was by Susruta, who conducted a rhinoplasty, a nose operation, meticulously recorded the procedures, and some of his instruments have been found by archaeologists. The invention of the zero, the idea that you could have a symbol representing nothing and that would simplify your calculations. The creation of the decimal system, all done by Indians. The discovery that the earth revolved around the sun and not the other way around was not by Galileo, it was by Aryabhatta and other Indian astronomers 1,000 years before Galileo. But we don't sufficiently appreciate all of this. We invented the zero, but these days it seems that all we invent is zero. And we have to change from there now.
Thank you very much, sir. We'll have the next question, sir. We are over the past, 20 minutes past. Can we go on with one or two more questions?
If you wish, you've got a couple more questions, no
Couple
problem.
more.
I can't stay forever because I do have a commitment afterwards and a very early morning departure tomorrow. But sure, we can have, say, two more questions.
A couple more questions. Yeah. Yes, one more. Yes.
A very good evening. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you.
Standing in front of you. So the education system in India is essentially letting the students qualify for university until they actually come to the university. Letting students pass is a norm till 8th standard, as you already know. But after getting a reality check in the university or colleges, the students feel doomed. What could be a better way to make the students not feel doomed and actually qualify for university or life?
Now, wait a minute. Why do they feel doomed?
Because the way that they perceive how universities and colleges work, how people around them work, they don't feel good. For example, when I came from a small village to Ahmedabad, for example, I was not feeling very good about myself because I did not have that par excellence that most people had around me.
Okay, I mean, I obviously each of us has individual experiences that vary. I would have thought that for the majority of your peers, that it would have been a liberating thing to be on a university campus. That suddenly you're free of all the restrictions that come with school, the fixed hours, the school uniforms, the martinet teachers, going home to your parents. Suddenly you're in a place where you're free to be yourself, to dress as you like, to learn different subjects, to open up your mind. So I would have thought it would be more liberating rather than making you feel doomed. I can understand some being intimidated initially, but I have no doubt that passes with time. You don't seem to me a very intimidated young lady today. And I suspect that was because after you came from the village and you felt all this fear, that you got used to it and you got made friends and you mastered the subject and you felt fine, you can carry on. So I would say to all of you, I would want the university to be a place where students look forward to going as part of their growing up and getting ready for the world. And school is the place where the grounding has to be established. So that basic grounding, the foundations, is laid down through the stricter methods and the more rigorous application of discipline that schools involve. But college ought to be when you are liberated, when you think for yourself, when you do things for yourself. You know, I would argue probably that in my years at St. Stephen's College, I learned more outside the classroom than in the classroom because of the various things I had the opportunity to do. I founded the first quiz club in any Indian campus anywhere in India at that point. It's still functioning 50 years later. I revived the Humor Society in college, the Woodhouse Society. I ran for president of the college union. I acted in college plays. I went out and debated all over the country. There were so many opportunities that came through college and through learning how to stand on your own feet. No mommy, daddy to help you and hold your hand or guide you. You had to find yourself. It's such an indispensable part of growing up that it seems to me that no one should get into college and feel doomed. They should feel excited, they should feel empowered, and they should feel that they're ready to learn. That's what I would like to hope. I'm sure it's not true everybody, but for most people, that's the experience that should be.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was great. One question and sir, one from one of the students. Last question. That's it. Sorry, in the interest of time. Yes, sir.
University stands for cosmic consciousness. Nowadays, we are not listening enough ringing, descending voices from the universities. What's the reason and what's the remedy?
Sorry, sir, I'm not sure I quite grasped the thrust of the question.
I'm asking you, nowadays we are not listening enough ringing, descending voices from the universities. So what's the reason and what's the remedy? Because university stands for cosmic consciousness. Thank you.
So you're saying there have been dissenting voices in the university, and as a result, it's the consciousness part I didn't get. I'm sorry? Cosmic consciousness is lost. I see. Look, sir, I mean, these are sort of individual preoccupations. Dissenting voices are sort of part of the university experience and should be there in every campus. A cosmic consciousness is often also a matter of individual temperament. Not everyone is given to thinking beyond the world around them. I would argue that for many, the process of being in the university still is one about equipping themselves for the real world, for the job they might get. Very often, by the time they're halfway through college, they're thinking about what might I do in a profession, what kind of job may I look for. They're not contemplating the larger realities of the cosmos. For those who are so inclined, a university should offer a hospitable grounds for exploring that too if they wanted to. I must admit that I had some very interesting conversations during my college years. My college was not a Jesuit college, it was an Anglican college, St. Stephen's. But I mean, the chaplain was quite prepared to engage with discussions about the hereafter and so on. And I think that if you wanted to explore these things, the university should leave that possibility open. Maybe 1%, 2% of the students are interested in developing a cosmic consciousness. Or maybe those who are would go to different kinds of places, would go to theological seminaries or go to departments of philosophy. I don't know. The vast majority of students would not share your preoccupation. Whereas the issue of dissent and freedom of expression and so on, that applies to everybody. And that's whatever you're studying, whatever subject you're studying, whatever your larger consciousnesses may be, that's something that you would have a right to say. Not everybody dissents. Not everybody is politically conscious. In fact, in many cases, we're talking about preserving the rights of a minority who want to be engaged, who want to protest, who want to whatever. The vast majority of students can't be bothered. I mean, let's face it. But the point about democracy, the point about academic freedom, the point about university life is to permit the rights of those minorities. Minorities in every respect, including intellectually the minorities. So I think that's probably my answer to your question if I got it right. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. And to bring this Q&A to a close, a question from one of our student volunteers.
And Father, I don't know about your timepiece. It wasn't 20 minutes. We have now spent, if I may tell you, we have now spent 39 minutes. But that's perfectly all right.
Sir,
I enjoyed it. I actually looked at my watch when I sat down. It was 16 minutes past 7. It's now 55 past.
That's how engaging and timeless your speech is, sir. And I only counted the question time, I suppose. Thank you so much for your generosity.
He's saying basically my answers are too long. So I'll give you a short answer.
Well, that's a Jesuit way of saying it. Yes, ma'am.
Hello, sir. I am Shinjini Chaturvedi, and what can we say? We at Xavier's are an inquisitive bunch. So, yeah, and sir, as students of English language teaching and English literature, we have learned the importance of language or of learner-centered teaching in the modern education system. But the question that I wish to ask you is that as students, what do you suggest that we do in order to take an initiative and cultivate a well-formed mind instead of a well-filled one?
Well, I think the art of it, quite frankly, is in reading beyond what you have to read, inquiring beyond what the course requires you to, what the teacher requires you to, and if necessary, going to teachers and having an opportunity to engage with them on things that may not be part of the curriculum. Ultimately, habits of thought are what you need to acquire in the university. Ultimately, what you study inside the classroom is not what you retain. Einstein once said something along the lines of, an educated mind is what you have left after you've forgotten everything you studied for the examinations. That's what the mind is all about. It is, as I said, how to think. So take initiatives, explore further, read beyond the syllabus and the course, and engage in conversations. I mean, in my time, we used to have the stereotype in Delhi University of the coffee house intellectual, you know, with his Charminar in one hand and his coffee in the other, holding forth on every conceivable subject. And we wondered what use he would be to the real world. And some of them probably never grew up and never were of much use in the real world. Many of them went on to very different lives and careers afterwards. But that process of inquiry and debate and discussion is often its own reward. I can tell you, I remember when I was in college, I was doing an honors degree in history. Delhi University offered certain courses and the colleges could choose which of those courses to offer. So in Delhi University, you had in theory a course on American history and a course on history of the Far East, China, Japan, Korea. And St. Stephen's College only offered the latter. I wanted to study the former. So I went to the head of the Department of History and said, so why can't I study American history? And he said, we're not offering it here. And he said, my dear boy, don't worry, the Americans have no history. Seriously. So I said, so whatever history they have, I'd like to study. The university is going to offer an exam in the subject. Why can't I study it? So he looked at me slightly skeptically, but I was the best student at that point in my first year. So he said, all right, if you can get me 10 signatures of students, I'll find you a teacher. So I went out and I got 17 signatures from my classmates. And they had to offer a course on American history, and I'm proud to say they're still offering it all these years. So there was something which, if I just accepted what the college is offering and not tried to go beyond that, I would never have had the opportunity of learning what I thought was a fascinating country to learn about, which has such an outsized impact on the rest of us. So knowing their history was actually, I think for me, it gave me depth of understanding to get us to where we are today. But I had to take that initiative. So take the initiative, think for yourself, see what you can do. I might have failed. I might not have had a receptive professor, who knows? But the truth is that these things actually will be ultimately what you look back upon as part of your growing up at university. Good luck to all of you. Thank you so much for a very enjoyable evening.
Thank you so much, sir. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Father Sunil. Thank you for being so candid and approachable, sir. Thank you. A huge round of applause for Dr. Shashi Tharoor. Sir, I would now request you to please take your seat in the audience. I'll escort. Of all the words in the world, the words of gratitude are the most important. I'm sure Dr. Tharoor would agree. I begin with gratitude to the most important one, the Almighty, in whom we live and move and have our being. How do I thank our speaker for today, Dr. Shashi Tharoor? His words, his brilliance, his profundity, and his amazing personality have lit us up, filled our hearts and minds, and impacted us for a long, long time. Thank you, sir, for your presence here, for your involvement with us, for your time. More than everything else, thank you for being you. I would also like to thank the college principal, Father Vinayak Jadhav, for conceiving of this speaker at this event. But I cannot thank him without thanking the Jesuit community who prompted Father Herbert DeSouza to establish the college, the Society of Jesus that is represented here in Father Durai, the provincial, and Father Pichai, the rector. A big thanks to Father Johnson for making the HD Auditorium available to us, and a big thank you also to all the fathers of the St. Xavier's community. Thanks to the staff members and the students who have worked towards this event, in spite of submission deadlines, approaching examinations, and so many other pressures. You all have done a wonderful job. All the volunteers deserve a round of applause. Thank you, guys. Dharmesh sir, Disha ma'am, Anna ma'am, the extracurricular committee, the student volunteers of all the departments, thank you. To Sailesh Bhai Christie and Joy Christian, thank you for the efforts you have put in to make the various facilities available to us. Thanks to the technical staff who helped with the screening of the lecture at the Zika Auditorium as well. Thank you, Robson Bhai, Vijay Bhai, and team. Thanks to all the media persons and the press for covering today's event. It means a lot to us. Thanks to the amazing audience present here at the Herbert DeSouza Hall to share in the Xavier's journey towards excellence. Thank you for coming here. And as they say in Gujarati, Avjo, come again. And thanks to the students seated in the Zika Hall. We can't see them, but they can see us. So thank you, students at the Zika Hall. Thank you, everyone who partook in this unforgettable event. May I now request the audience to rise for the national anthem.
जन गण मन अधिनायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता पंजाब सिंध गुजरात मराठा द्राविड उत्कल गंगा विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उच्चल जलधि तरंगा तव शुभ नामे जागे तव शुभ आशीष मांगे गाहे तव जय गाथा जन गण मंगलदायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता जय हे जय हे जय हे जय 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 हे.
As we leave, let us take away this one learning from Dr. Tharoor. Too many times we stand aside and let the water slip away. What we put off till tomorrow has now become today. So don't you sit upon the shore and say you're satisfied. Choose to chance the rapids and dare to dance the tide. Thank you. This is Jean DeSouza signing out. Thank you, everyone.